Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are going to continue down the list of the 50 best horror movies that you've never seen, with number 37 for us, but number 39 on the list, Wrong Turn. Wrong Turn came out in 2003 and was directed by Rob Smith and written by Alan McElroy. And for those of you who don't know, this movie is actually based in West Virginia, and as being someone born and raised in West Virginia, it's a little bit kind of close to home, but not really. The movie does not paint West Virginia in a good light at all, but we'll get into that later. First, let's start with the quick synopsis of the movie. In the deep woods of West Virginia is a horribly mutated and deformed family who has gone through generations of inbreeding and has started to hunt tourists and take them back to their house to serve them up for dinner. Our main character, Chris, is on his way to a job interview whenever there is a roadblock in the highway because of I believe it was like an oil spill or something, and he has to turn around and try to find another way because he just simply cannot wait in traffic for hours. So he turns back and finds an old gas station that he stops by and asks the man if there's another way to get to the highway. The guy's not really that helpful, but Chris does see a map attached to a corkboard outside, so he confronts the map and sees that there is a road that eventually will lead to the highway. So, not wanting to miss his interview, Chris decides to take a turn down that road and just see where it leads him. Now, Chris is already running late, so he is driving really fast, and he turns a blind corner and ends up running headfirst into a parked car in the middle of the road. He gets out angry that there's a car parked in the middle of the road, while all the people in the car get out angry that he just hit the car, and he finds out that their car had been stopped due to barbed wire left on the road that wrapped around their tires. Chris's car is pretty much totaled, so he can't drive them back into the town, so they start to discuss the option of some of them walking back up the road to try to find civilization or a phone. They talk about the gas station, but Chris had already said the phone there doesn't work, so they thought maybe there'd be some type of house or someone around who'd be able to help them. There are 5 people who are in the van that Chris hits, but 2 of them choose to stay behind while the other 3 and Chris go out on the adventure. Shortly after leaving, the 2 left at the van end up getting attacked by unseen people, and their car is then towed away. Meanwhile, Chris, Jesse, Carly, and Scott stumble upon a house in the woods and go inside hoping to find a phone. Now, everything outside of the house and inside of the house is super rusty and dirty and gross and dingy. The place just looks nasty. There's flies everywhere, old food. You can just sort of tell it's just a rundown place. But desperate to get out, they start to look around hoping that they'll eventually find a phone. But what they find instead is some items that don't make sense. There's piles of sunglasses, clothes, shoes. They even found a closet that has things like paddle boards and, just other souvenir, touristy kind of things. And that's when they start to realize maybe something isn't right here. They'd already had suspicions that someone left the barbed wire out on the road as it was tied to a tree. So now they're starting to think maybe there's a connection here. While looking around, Carly finds the bathroom and goes inside hoping to be able to relieve herself, but instead finds a bathtub full of body parts and blood. At the same time, Chris finds a pot on the stove boiling away with a bunch of bones in it, and that's when they start to realize we need to get out of here. As they go to leave the house, a car pulls up, towing their friend's van and Chris's Mustang. And unable to escape through the back as the door is locked, they decide to try to just hide and wait it out. Carly and Scott, who are engaged, find their way into a closet and sort of lock themselves in there, while Chris and Jesse have to hide under the bed. Unfortunately, Chris and Jesse chose the wrong room to hide in, as the mutants walk inside with the dead bodies of their 2 friends and throw the girl onto the table and start cutting her limbs off. Once they've cut off her leg, they serve it up for dinner and then immediately pass out on the bed that Jesse and Chris are under. When the mutant is really asleep and snoring, they sneak out from under him. Carly and Scott sneak out from the closet they're in, and they do get out, but not before the mutant wakes up and sees Chris leaving. So the group is running through the woods trying to outrun these mutants when they come across a clearing with dozens of broken down cars. And as they're looking at all these cars, most of them big vans or just sort of RVs, they start to realize that these people have been capturing tourists for years. There are so many abandoned cars. They even find hints of children like toys and tricycles lying around and realize the true horrors of what they have stumbled across. The mutants end up catching up with them, and pretty much the entire movie is them trying to outrun these mutants. We only ever see 3 of the mutants, which are effectively named One Eye, Sawtooth, and Three Finger, as those are their most distinctive features. But as they're trying to escape, they do slowly start to get picked off. Other than the 2 who were attacked at the van, Scott's the first one in our group before to get attacked, Jesse, Carly, and Chris were able to steal the truck that the mutants were using as they had left it running when they got out looking for them, and they were circling back to come get Scott, who was running around as a distraction, and they end up shooting him with arrows. He gets 3 arrows to the back and drops dead. Carly, of course, is so distraught at watching her fiance fall to the ground with arrows in his back. She's begging them to go back for him, and they have to tell, like, Carly, I know this is like so difficult for you, but like we can't stop. And eventually they end up finding a watchtower with a radio, but the light from the tower and the sound of the radio draws the mutants to them, and they burn the tower down. Our 3 survivors do jump into the trees below, grabbing onto branches to try to slow their fall, and they don't think the mutants know that they're there, but because these mutants are, you know, backwoods savages, Three Finger is able to climb up the trees with so much ease that these kids will never be able to outrun him. They are still trying to hop from branches to branches, trying to escape. Unfortunately, Carly does not. She ends up getting decapitated. But Chris and Jesse do end up finding a way to escape, and they stumble across a huge cliff with a waterfall, with a cave behind it, which is where they go to sleep for the night. And then the next morning, they try to make their way to escape. They finally do find road, and as they're running down there, Jesse ends up getting attacked by one of the mutants. Chris falls down the hill and is at the bottom as Jesse is getting drug away. Now, at the exact moment that Chris lands at the bottom of the road, a cop car pulls up because the signals they were sending out from the watchtower were being received. People were hearing their SOS call. So the cop said, "We've been driving around all over looking for you. Where have you guys been?" And Chris was like, "We have to go. They took her." And he was like, "What do you mean they took her?" And he said, "The people in the woods, they took Jesse." And as the cop says, "What people?" he gets an arrow to the eye and drops dead. The mutants come to take the car and the police officer, because as you know, no bodies or cars are left after they attack. And Chris, worried for Jesse's safety, crawls under the car, hooks somehow his arms under something under the car, and is able to hold on long enough till they get back to the house. I don't really believe that, but whatever. And he finds Jesse tied up on the bed. The mutants are about to kill her and serve her up for dinner when Chris bashes through the front of the house in the truck, catches the whole place on fire, and does end up escaping with Jesse. They escape in the trucks that the mutants have, are able to find their way back to the road, and drive all the way back to the gas station where they rip the map down so no one ever has to take the same wrong turn again, and then they drive off into the sunset. Now, after the credits roll for about 30 seconds, we do get an end credit scene where a search and rescue team shows up at the house, sees the burnt down cabin with bodies inside, along with the body of their co-worker, who had his head cut off as well once they brought him back to the house. But what they don't realize is that one of the mutants is still alive, Mr. Three Finger, and he attacks them from behind, and that's where the movie ends. Let's start with the West Virginia thing. This movie, like I said, is based in West Virginia, and as some of you may or may not know, I'm born and raised. I'm from West Virginia. And I have to tell you, we aren't like this. This is not a good representation of West Virginia. And actually, a lot of people were upset when this movie came out because it shows West Virginians as just such backwood inbred savages. West Virginia isn't the best state to begin with, and to have this be our legacy movie is not the greatest. I know there are other movies that are based in West Virginia, but this one was maybe not a huge movie when it came out, but just being just so bizarre and from West Virginia, it didn't help our image. It didn't paint us in a great light, and for a long time I didn't love the movies because of that, just because the image it was giving off. And the film isn't even shot in West Virginia, it's shot in Canada, it's just based in West Virginia. And I also find it funny that describing the mutants, we get about like a 2-minute opening sequence with a bunch of newspaper clippings that shows, you know, there's inbreeding in West Virginia, generations of deformities, and it shows images of people with deformities, which are things that I guess could actually happen if you do have generations of inbreeding, but it's not something that like people are doing. And I promise you there aren't generations of inbred monsters in the forests of West Virginia. And I'm not even sure if like the normal people in the movie are from West Virginia. They never say where they're from. They just know that they are in West Virginia. And when they're like getting ready to break into the house to try to find a phone, Scott does say West Virginia plus trespassing equals not a good combination, which is like kind of just a funny line, because what does that mean? Like, state plus trespassing equals not a good combo? But putting that aside, this movie didn't get the greatest reviews when it came out. It was kind of just average all around the board. You see people who love it and you see people who hate it. A big reason why is because it's nothing new. None of the concepts in the movie are new. It's very reminiscent of Hills Have Eyes and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in the sense of cannibalism, deformities, inbreeding, living in the mountains. It's definitely not a new idea, and it's not even like a huge improvement on an old idea. It's just something that we've seen and we're comfortable with. But I also saw reviews that said this movie, while it's not new and while maybe it's not the most engaging story, it checks a lot of those scary movie cliche boxes that make a movie something people want to watch again. And the movie does have good genuine suspense and thrills. The chase throughout is really, really tense, and right as you think they're gonna get a moment of relief, another mutant comes around and starts fucking with them. So it's really just a lot of back and forth, and you think they're good and then they're not. You think they're good and then they're not. So there is good tension. And the first time I watched this movie, up until this time when I watched this movie, I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the tension, and it's a little bit redundant, and you're like, okay, I get it, they're still coming, they God, give them a break. But it's about that hunt. That's what these mutants do, is they hunt these tourists. People don't survive when they go out into these woods, and there's a reason, because these mutants are good at what they do. They can scale trees in no time, they're familiar with the land, and it's just a really good, intense, hour-long fighting of just back and forth that we get. So while I don't love that this movie paints West Virginia in such a bad light, I do actually like this movie. I think it's a good horror movie. I think it's got good suspense, it's got good blood, it's a little cheesy and overdone in places, but it is fun, and you do sort of relate to the characters in a way. I think there are huge issues with the movie, one of the big ones being jumping from a radio tower into trees. They think, okay, there's trees down there, we can stop us, the branches will slow us down, and then we can grab onto a big one. And they all three jump, and Chris at this point has a bullet in his calf. He got shot by one of the mutants, and he just jumps and slides down this tree and catches a branch and holds. And then Jessie, when she jumps, she lands back first on a branch and flips over and grabs it, but is perfectly fine and not winded. So you do have to kind of let things go a little bit in this movie, because there are parts that you're like, there's no way you would survive that. But it does make it just a little bit more fun, because you're thinking there's no way they'll survive that, and then they almost do slide all the way down to the bottom of the tree, so you think maybe they won't survive this. And while Chris hiding under the cop car as the mutants drive it back to their place does allow him to save Jessie, I also am not sure if that would be what I would have done. Everyone that the mutants captured ends up dying, and for whatever reason this was the one time the mutants didn't kill the girl before taking her to the house, and I guess that's just to help the plot, but it still irritated me, because if I was Chris, I have a bullet in my leg, I've been through this traumatic experience, a cop just showed up and got shot and was taken away, but the thing is, that officer's not gonna radio back to the station, he's not gonna show back up, people are gonna come looking for him. All Chris needed to do was hide out in the woods in a place where he could see the road but not be seen by the mutants, and then just wait for more police officers to show up, because they're going to at some point. And Chris has already proven that he can hide from the mutants because he did it with Jessie multiple times, but he has to go back and save Jessie. Whatever, I get it. In the end sequence where the search and rescue team shows up to find Three Fingers is still alive is just cheesy setup for a sequel, so you know a sequel is coming. And I believe there's 7 movies in total. The 7th one is actually Wrong Turn, coming out in 2021, which is going to be just a remake of the original. But Wrong Turn 2, which was the direct sequel to the first one, is about Three Fingers being the surviving mutant in the family, and he still continues to do what they do. More people get lost in the woods, yada yada yada. But my biggest issue with that is we only ever see the 3 characters, One Eye, Sawtooth, and Three Fingers. We never see any other mutants, especially no mutant females. But in the second movie, Three Fingers has a baby. So, and I know in some of the movies they use the females that they capture as just for breeding purposes essentially, but I feel like this movie could have been one where it was just kind of a one and done thing. I don't believe that a mutant family would be able to live in the woods for this long, especially if a search and rescue team came. Even if Three Fingers successfully killed the search and rescue team, more and more officers are going to come. They know that there's something going on in these woods because people keep disappearing. So I feel like after this movie there really shouldn't have been a sequel, because some type of law enforcement, FBI, something would have ransacked that forest looking for the now missing police officer and search and rescue team. But I digress, you can't make money with movies like that, so And honestly, the other Wrong Turns, I've never watched any of the sequels because they just don't get that good of reviews. Wrong Turn, this 2003 version, only gets like 50% of good reviews. The other 50% are people who are kind of annoyed with the story. So the sequels just get worse and worse and worse. People are hoping that the 2021 remake will sort of revive the Wrong Turn series, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Because honestly, the movie didn't make a lot of money in comparison to how much was used. It was about $12.6 million to produce the movie, and for the gross, I saw different numbers, but it seemed to be ranging from anywhere to about 15 to about 26 to 28 million dollars in return. So they possibly didn't even fully double what they spent on the movie. And it wasn't one that saw a lot of love at first. It sort of took a little while for people to really start to love the movie the way it is today. And lots of critics say that this movie, it's not new ideas, it's not a new concept, but it does have genuine scares and genuine suspense. Like when the police officer shows up with Chris, you know he is going to die, you know Chris is not going to get off that easy, but you're not sure how they're going to choose to kill the police officer. And they shoot him in the eye with an arrow, which is my favorite death of the movie, by the way, because it is just so, like, I know he's going to die, but how are they going to do it? And then it just happens out of nowhere. It's, like, quick, but we get to see the shot right through the eye. It's great. It's great effects. I love it. And the special effects in this movie, they're a little bit overdone. Some of the scenes where the mutants are using the dead bodies are just a little bit like, okay, like, I get it. But it's not like super, super gory and bloody and gross. It's not what you would expect, but it does have a good level of gore. It's something that, like, if you're kind of squeamish with blood, you could still make it through this movie. And a big reason why the effects were so good in this movie is because Stan Winston, who was credited as a producer, was actually one of the lead special effects makeup artists on set. He was a huge part of the design for the mutants and helping get the mutated like lumps on their backs, the way their faces were deformed. Stan Winston has also done movies like the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park. He helped with the special effects on Iron Man, and he even did the Terminator movies. So I'm not sure why they didn't credit him as the lead special effects artist. They did have a small team working with them, but Stan Winston was the big reason that the mutants looked as great as they did and the effects were done so well. So shout out to Stan Winston because he did make this movie just a little bit more believable than I think it could have been. Because while we don't get to see any up close gruesomeness, we get to see just enough to make you go, oof, that was nasty. And another thing that I read with this movie is it's the only one in the series that includes no nudity and no sex scenes, not even a kissing scene, really. And the purpose behind that was this film already checked a lot of the stereotypical cliche horror movie boxes. Mutants in the woods, cannibalism, kids getting stranded, people separating, you know, kind of stuff in that sense. And another big thing that we see with horror movies is nudity or some type of sex scene. And while the kids who stayed at the van do fool around a little bit, we don't even get to see anything other than the guy dropping his pants. Chris and Jesse do share a kiss when they're behind the waterfall after discussing the events that had happened that day, but they cut that scene out of the movie as well. And even when Jesse is tied to the bed, there was discussion of having the mutant sort of strip her clothes off of her before killing her, but they chose not to do that either. They sort of felt like this movie didn't need the nudity. It was already kind of cliche and stereotypical in the horror movie sense, so it really didn't need that extra push of unnecessary nudity. All the other movies have it, so if that's what you want with your Wrong Turn, you can get that. But honestly, I'm kind of happy that they didn't go that route. I was expecting that in the scene behind the waterfall for Jesse and Chris to start like making out or something. And I think because I was expecting that, I was even happier when they didn't do it. And fear is something that can really elicit a lot of emotion in you, especially when you're coming down from the adrenaline rush that it's given. And you can have sort of like waves of emotion. And Jessie had just watched her friends die, and she even admitted to Chris the only reason they were out here is because she got dumped and Carly told everyone to blow off work so they can go on like a little trip together. So she's having a lot of guilt about what has just happened, and Chris is telling her like it's not your fault, you couldn't have predicted any of this happening. So you expect them to have an intimate moment there, and they don't. And I appreciate that almost more than anything, because with super intense scenes like that, you expect something like that to happen, but a lot of times you just have to think those kids are exhausted. It's been a full day, they haven't eaten or drank anything. She just watched 4 of her friends die. I feel like the last thing on her mind right now is getting like a makeout session. And I know I always joke about like it's not a true 80s horror movie, there's no boobage, and you know, boobs are a part of being in horror, but I do appreciate horror movies that don't do it, especially whenever it's something so emotionally exhausting like this movie would be. You would be so physically and emotionally exhausted. I really feel like making out with some guy you just met in the woods is not going to be on your agenda. And some movies that still force those love scenes, it feels forced because you're thinking, why would they be doing this right now? Why is this what's on your mind? So I feel like that just helps a little bit with the believability in this movie by leaving that stuff out. And the sequels we see to this movie, we get I think 2 sequels and there's like 2 prequels that tell you about the family and how they got there. In this film, we just get that weird newspaper clipping in the beginning. We really don't get a lot of explanations for anything in this film. It's really like we are with those kids stumbling across these things as they are. As the audience, we get no background information, which I think also leads to sort of the mystery and like, what the hell is all of this? Because you don't know what to expect either. Which is just another reason why I think this movie is more successful than people give it credit for. As far as the gore rating goes for this movie, I'm going to rate it gore-tesque because it is a bloody, gory bloodbath of cannibalistic nature. We get to see body parts, blood, heads getting cut off, an arrow to the eye. Now while some stuff does feel a little bit cheesy and overdone, the mutants' effects are great. The random body parts around when they cut the sheriff's head off is great. The sounds that they use are great. So I'm not totally mad at how cheesy some of the bloody, gory scenes are. And I know some people think this movie is a little bit over the top with the gore, but I don't know. I like more gory movies, so this is right in like my sweet spot. I think it's not too much, it's not too little, it's a good amount of blood. And yes, I do think this movie deserves to be on this list. I was actually surprised to see it on the list because I thought it was a bigger movie than I guess it is. Maybe it's because I'm from West Virginia, so in West Virginia this was a bigger movie because we got a horror movie about us, although it's about mutant inbred freaks, but it's about West Virginia. So I was shocked to see this movie on the list, and I do think it rightfully deserves to be there. It is a good horror movie. It's something you can watch alone or with friends and have just as good of a time. If it's a movie you guys haven't seen, I highly recommend you go out and watch it, and I am interested in seeing the 2021 version when it comes out this year. I'd love to know your all's thoughts on the movie, if you think it's kind of too cliche or if you think it's sort of right around the sweet spot for where it is. You can leave a comment down below or head over to my Instagram, What a Horror. I'll be making a post about this video as well. But as always, I want to thank you guys so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you want to see new videos. I put out new videos every Friday. And until next time, stay spooky.